Hey, what's up everybody? Video 44 coming out to another video. So I was half asleep and I heard something pop up in my head. Half asleep, half awake. Weird energy, but popped up in my head and said, what kind of return do you think you can get for Cade Cunningham? It was just somebody posed that question in my head. Maybe a ghost or something. Like, what do you think you can get for Cade Cunningham? And it took me down a rabbit hole where I had a whole conversation I realized should have been having on camera. But I kind of bring as much of it to the table as I can here. Cade Cunningham is a guy, and I think we may have had this conversation earlier in the offseason. Cade Cunningham is a guy where his value has so many question marks because you drafted him to be a superstar and you still think he can become that. But he's also had some issues with his injuries that make you kind of have a cause for pause. And because he's not a naturally athletic guy, you wonder if the injuries are going to be something that cause him more issues. Maybe he ends up being a guy who can't necessarily stay healthy or has longer time to recover from those injuries. So that's one thing to look at in regards to Cade. I couldn't really come to a pinpoint conclusion of what type of trade made sense for him, because if you're the Pistons, you got Ivy to consider, Asur to consider, Duran to consider. You got a really nice timeline, and he's supposed to be the highest level talent on the team. But the problem is the injuries could make it so that his value could tumble. But I've been around watching basketball long enough to know that some guys start off with really bad injuries and end up turning into superstars anyway. Steph Curry used to have the worst ankles in the league, and for a good 4 years, he was just injury prone, and he was rolling ankles every couple months. And then he turned into what he is, a legend that we know, super duper great GOAT type like guy, right? Look at a guy like Michael Jordan. His second season had a knee injury, it kept him out all year long. And you move on from him thinking he's going to be injury prone, and you give away the GOAT. So it's like you don't really know. Cade Cunningham was a first overall pick. He's a 6'10" point guard, and that is what makes him extremely intriguing. You look at him like a Bron type size guy who has point guard intangibles, Magic Johnson type intangibles. So it's like trying to find the right trade for him is tricky. Now, I threw some names out there in my head. I was thinking a guy like Scotty Barnes, because you want guys who are not quite out of their rookie contracts. Now, I don't know what Scotty's contract is, but to me it seemed like that made a lot of sense, because Scotty's a guy who plays significant defense. His three-point shot is continuing to improve. He can hit it, facilitating player. He would overall add to the Pistons situation. And if you move Cade to Toronto, they have a starting, franchise point guard that they could work with. That ultimately puts them in a position to feel good about their future if they're starting over with him from scratch, just like they feel good about going forward with Scotty Barnes. I threw out a name like Josh Giddey, thinking about tall point guards, who I think complement everyone no matter what situation they're in. He's kind of a guy that came to mind, but I don't know that you think of him as a guy who has the type of ceiling that Cade does, given the fact he was the first overall pick. I think I'm a little higher on Giddey than probably the consensus would be when considering a trade like this. Plus, I'm considering the fact that Cade could fall off into the trade. You know what I mean? It's not like I expect Cade to turn into LeBron if I'm trading him for Giddey. This is more so along the downside if I'm worried about he's going to be injury prone. So these are the type of things I've been thinking about for the last 30 minutes as this thought just popped in my head. Who would be the best trade for Cade? But I think a more intriguing question is, does it make any sense to want to trade Cade at all? And I'm 50-50. I'm 50-50 for the Pistons. Even though they have other players that can kind of do certain things that you would want Cade to do, facilitating stuff like that. Once you pick up Asur, you have a pure facilitator. Once you pick up Jaden Ivey, you have a pure point guard. So it's like, what do you need Cade to really be going forward? Well, the answer is a fantastic scorer, shooter, combo player, rebounder, and most importantly, a 6'10" guy who can slip up and down the roster at will. You got him at the point guard position now, but eventually Jaden Ivey, if he turns into what he's supposed to, you probably don't want him to stay at the 2 guard for too long. I can get away with keeping Asur at the 3. He's a natural 3, even though he's looking to facilitate. So long as his 3-point shots continues to improve, you feel amazing about Asur. So it's a lot of different things there in Piston land to love. But for me, it's like you got the number one guy in Cade Cunningham teetering while those two guys' value is ascending the right way without the injury. So it's kind of tricky for me when I assess the Pistons, because I'm like, if Cade goes to the downside, it's going to affect Ivy, Asur, and the other young guys on the team in such a way that's going to cop what it is that team ultimately can be. Now, if he continues to ascend into what it is he's supposed to be, which is the best player on that team, then you're looking at the Pistons possibly win a championship within the next 6 years. But if he goes down a downside and he's a guy that averages under 50 games a season, you're looking at a situation where Cade Cunningham ultimately caps off what the Pistons can be by constantly missing games and forcing those other guys to do more, as to which they're just not as good of a team. The fact that Cade's ceiling is superstar, Bron James, Magic Johnson superstar, you need to be right, is essentially what I'm saying. And I would tell the GM of the Pistons, you got to lean on your gut in this situation. If you believe he's going to go to the downside with injuries and stuff like that, tumble forward and just only play 50 games a season, maybe only make like 1 or 2 all-star teams in his career, that's not what you drafted him to be, and that's not what he's here for at this moment. And since he's at that value where people still think he could be a top 10 guy, you'd probably be best to move him right now. But if you know he's going to turn into that, your gut's telling you don't move him, he's a Steph Curry guy who's going to overcome his issues physically over time and ultimately turn into a GOAT-like guy, then obviously you don't want to move him at all. So it's 50-50 for me. I wouldn't want to be in that situation because I really don't know which way to go. It is absolutely straight down the middle for me when it comes to Cade Cunningham, which is why I thought it was important to bring this conversation to the camera, because I'm like, man, I was sitting there for 30 minutes pondering this, and I'm like, this is great content, man. So a good trade piece for Cade Cunningham, in my opinion, if I'm the Pistons, is probably a guy who's going to elevate those other pieces and expedite their winning process. Problem is, any of those guys are likely on contracts that you can't swap for Cade, because Cade's still on his rookie deal, I believe. So the fact that he's on his rookie deal means I can't trade him for established star like a Dame or something like that. That's not happening. But that'd be probably what I would want to do, depending on the type of mind I am. I know a lot of people want a win now talent, that's kind of thing, to kind of expedite their process. You see the Rockets went off and brought in Fred VanVleet to kind of expedite their winning process as well. So I don't know if the Pistons feel that way. But for me, I just don't know which way to go when it comes to Cade, man. I'm afraid to start the season with him. He goes down with another knee injury and then tumbles forward as a guy who only plays 45 games a season. I really legitimately fear that. And I made a video about that earlier in this season, early in the off season, about thinking the Pistons should probably trade Cade. But there's another side to that, to where he's a 6'10" point guard who's highly efficient shooting the ball and doesn't really have too many issues. A really fantastic ISO player who's going to continue to develop. He's very intelligent, that kind of thing. He was a legitimate first overall pick a couple years ago, and the only thing that's really gotten in his way is injuries. So for me, it's like, all right, I don't know if I'm looking at this correctly or not. I'm not a doctor, but for me, I think the question would need to be, can he heal properly and go forward as a guy who's not a natural athlete as it pertains to, like, guys jumping out the gym like a Shaden Sharp and those kind of guys. I don't really know the truth about that. I just don't understand that fully. Maybe it is best that he's not a super athlete, so his game can be lowered to the ground and still age well, even if he does not necessarily get much more athletic. Say a guy like Paul Pierce, certain guys who were able to have Hall of Fame careers no matter what. I think Cade Cunningham is one of those. So maybe I'm not looking at this correctly. You know what I mean? Sometimes those athletes, super athletes, they have the injuries that send them tumbling without all athleticism whatsoever. They pop a knee and they never end up being able to jump high again. And as to which, if they don't have intangibles like Cade has, you're looking at a situation where they can't contribute very much. So I don't know how I'm to really look at that. I just don't know. But for me, he's a safe bet to be a gamer. If he could stay healthy throughout his entire career, he's a safe bet to have a Paul Pierce-like career, because he does not necessarily have those athletic gene, but he does find himself being somebody who doesn't make a whole lot of mistakes. And with his height and his size, you can slip him up and down the roster 4, 3, 2, 1, and he can do what he does from any position. So he's a hell of a player to keep. And for me, if I think a good trade for him, for me, if he's headed down to the downside, I'm gonna want a guy like Josh Giddey, Scotty Barnes, somebody who's also his height, who can also do the things he does. I want a 6'10" point guard for a 6'10" point guard, essentially what I'm saying to you. And if he signs his rookie extension, then you got him in conversations with guys like Tyrese Halliburton, LaMelo Ball, that sort of thing. You know what I mean? So it's like, I'm not looking at him like he can't turn into that type of guy. In fact, he might have higher ceilings than both of them if he stays healthy. He was drafted to be, that kind of thing. So it's like, Cade is such an intriguing piece, especially going into this particular season, because it can really tell you what the story is with him. If he has a full healthy season and plays like he's prone to play when he's healthy, he could be an all-star this year. It's not crazy at all. He could be an all-star this season. In fact, I think some people actually expect that. But for me, I look at his injury issues and I look at his lack of natural athleticism, and it just makes me wonder if what I'm looking at is a guy who's not going to be playing as much as you want your number one Magic Johnson overall guy to be playing. That's my thing. So I think it's one of the most intriguing conversations in the league right now is, should I be chopping Cade Cunningham if I'm the Pistons, and what can I get for him? And for me, I legitimately look at that and see it's either way. And rarely do I see things straight like that. It's to where either side is balanced in such a way that it's hard to make a good decision. But I really see it that way. Because he's such a talented guy, man. Before these injuries even hit, you could clearly see that he was going to be a dude that you were very confident in taking the first overall that year. It wasn't no question that he was one of them. And he's played well enough throughout the games that he has played to where his upside is exactly that. It ain't like he hasn't proven himself to be a 30-point scorer, that kind of thing. He can do that already. But the question is another knee injury going to pop up? If he goes down with 2 and 3 multiple knee injury, multiple surgeries, now you got a player that ain't going to even turn into that. And again, you should have traded him while people still were wondering. So it's like, a guy like Cade Cunningham may be able to net you a superstar youngster right now. I looked at a guy like Jalen Green from the Rockets, and I said, if they wanted to move on from Jalen Green, I don't know that you can get a straight-up trade for Cade Cunningham. But if Cade is headed to the downside, I could probably make that happen for myself. If I'm the Rockets, I'd feel comfortable about that. Bring in Cade Cunningham, 6'10" point guard next to his, Amen Thompson. And you find yourself feeling really good about that kind of piece in place of Jalen Green if you have to move on from Jalen, which nobody is. But you bring Jalen to the Pistons, you can move Ivy to the 1, you got Asura at the 3, and the roster kind of makes more sense because you got more traditional players in those positions. I don't personally love Jaden Ivey at the 2. Even though he could play it, I want him to be the number 1. Not number 1, but I want him to play the point guard position. Asura is comfortable at the 3, but I want a more traditional 2. Now, Cade can very well play 2 easily. So can Asura. So can Ivy. But I want traditional. Me personally, I just want a traditional player there, so I don't have guys trying to do too much or too little to fit in. And that's my concern about Jaden Ivey's fit on the Pistons. And no, I'm not trading Jaden Ivey. That's not happening. So it's like, do I trade Cade Cunningham for a pure shooting guard? That was something I went down a rabbit hole with. And Jalen Green, since he was a second overall pick that same year, kind of made sense to me from a Pistons perspective. I'd love to have Jalen Green next to Ivy. Now we start talking about super athletes next to each other. And Asura, you talking about athleticism galore. So that's interesting to me. So I was thinking about, okay, if I could just find a way to swap Cade Cunningham with like a superstar. I was like, can I get him in a Dame trade? Maybe find somebody else to help make the salary make sense or something like that. But I didn't see no path to that at all. I did not see a path to that. I went down the rabbit hole of maybe trading Cade to like the Bucks or something like that. Maybe they'd be willing to part ways with, again, super salary, but a nice swap like Drew Holiday right now. If things are headed down to the downside for Cade, maybe you want to move him for a champion like Drew Holiday, who's super elite defensively, will overall heighten the overall talent of your Piston team, but not necessarily take anything away from it. Probably not the greatest swap. I quickly got rid of that. But, these type of things that you think about. Some people would say, okay, well, maybe trade Cade for like James Harden, but nah, I value Cade higher than James Harden. Again, salary, can't do it. So these are the type of things that make Cade a little tricky. Now, if he were already signed to a big contract or an extension, it would probably be easier to try to assess those type of trades. But if he was on that type of contract, you probably don't feel as comfortable with his injury issues trying to make that type of trade. You'd much rather, if you're the receiving team, take him while he's on a rookie contract. That way, if you get him and he does have that injury issue, you don't have to pay him all that, that kind of thing. Now, the particulars of having to give a guy a $270 million extension, I don't know if it has to be the team that they were drafted at. Maybe the Pistons are the only team that could pay him that. I'm not really certain. So these are the type of things you just think about as you brainstorming the Cade situation. I think like combination of players, you want to trade him to another one of those young teams like Orlando. Franz Wagner was a name that came to mind really quickly. Even though I don't know that people value Franz as high as Cade's supposed to be, I think that I value Franz high enough to make a trade like that. Maybe if I add another player like, Cole Anthony or to that trade, maybe it kind of makes more sense for the Pistons. But that's the type of piece that I think would make the Pistons very happy. If for some reason Cade does turn into that injury-prone dude that can only play 50 games a year, you would love to have had a guy like Franz Wagner in his stead over the next 4 or 5 years. You definitely would. So these type of things come to mind, man. Obviously, if you look at him as a super duper star, you ain't gonna want to go to Franz. You probably gonna want Paolo. You're gonna want the number one guy of the other team with the rookie contract. So it's just an infinite conversation that could go a lot of different ways, simply because we're in a space where Cade is healthy in the offseason, coming off of 2 knee injuries seasons the past 2 years, and now it's time for him to show if he's either going to be an injury prone player who's going to have another knee problem, or the guy that you ultimately thought he was going to be, who could turn into somebody as good as Magic Johnson or something, like literally. So that's the problem. Since his upside is so damn high, what you drafted him to be was so elite, you almost don't feel comfortable trading him for even really, really solid superstar upsides players like a Jalen Green or Franz Wagner. You almost don't feel like you're getting right for him. Got Josh Giddey. You almost don't feel like you're getting enough for him. So that's what it becomes, a situation where the receiving team of Cade Cunningham needs to be able to know who they're getting. And at this point, they don't. That's the problem. They don't know. You're just a believer or a non-believer. You know what I'm saying? And that's really what it comes down to for Cade. So I don't know what's safe. I would love to say the safest thing to do is to keep him and develop him. But after what I've seen from the injuries, I'm not sure that's the case. I don't know if it's safe or not to trade him at this value while it still looks like he could be a superstar. That's probably the safer way. But you give away Steph Curry while his ankles are bad, and you regret that for the rest of your life. And that's the situation the Pistons are in. But I would tell you this, and I've already said it, but I'll say it again. They have more than just Cade to consider. They got Ivy, who has superstar upside. They got a Sewer, who has all-star upside. And you got those 2 centers, and Duren and Wiseman, who have all-star upside. You got to make sure everybody there is being accounted for properly. If Cade is supposed to be the very best player of them, he can't fall off. He just simply can't fall off. And that's what makes it even tougher to assess whether or not trading him makes sense for the Pistons. If it were just him and you're starting over, I look at it differently. Like, if you don't have those guys in place, I look at it differently. But since they've already been drafted, now it's like, all right, I don't want to mess up their situation by having an assessment piece in place that doesn't manifest into what he should. I think Cade is going to be a star, but I also think Cade could be an injury-prone guy. Do I build the same way if I'm certain of one or the other? And the answer is, I don't think so. So that is how I'm looking at that. So yeah, man, it's a lot of different ways to go about that. I think Kate Cunningham could be a great piece for a number of teams. I would love to have him on purple and gold. I would love to, if I could move D'Angelo Russell for him. Obviously, I'm gonna do something like that. But if the Pistons did something like that, they probably fired a GM. So it's like that's kind of the safe way for a team, for my team to go. Like I could do a safe trade. I feel great about bringing in Kate Cunningham, believing he's going to head to the downside. I could do that if I'm the Lakers, believing he's going to be injury prone with 40 games a season, thinking that maybe I could turn that around if I just give him a lesser role. Maybe he, you know what I mean? That kind of thing, not lesser role, but like I put him in like an Austin Reeves type role and he develops into somebody who only plays 50 games a season. And it's like he's just D'Angelo Russell, you know what I mean? But taller, with more upside, probably more talent in general. So it's like, that's what I would feel comfortable doing as a Laker fan. I'm not trying to give away too much for him, but then again, I'm coming from a fan perspective, and I just probably ain't gonna give you value for what you want based on that. But if I'm the Pistons, I'm not going for nothing like that at all. And for me, if I'm the Pistons and I think he's gonna go to the upside, then I'm gonna want to trade him for a superstar, or not trade him at all, obviously. So that's kind of how you look at that. So for me, safe bet, truly, somebody in the Franz Wagner, Jared Green from Houston, Scotty Barnes. That's the type of level. Giddy. That's the type of level I think is safe, to where if he teeters one way, you didn't hate the trade. If he goes to the upside superstar level, you don't hate the trade too much, because you still got back a guy who could turn into something crazy great too. So that's kind of what fits for me if I'm the Pistons. If I just have to move them without having these questions answered, give me some players like that. So yeah, man, that's my Cade Cunningham conversation. I don't know what spirit dropped into my skull while I was half asleep and asked me what type of trade could come for Cade Cunningham. I tell you, that's exactly how it came to me too, and that quasi weird, not quite sleep, not quite awake type of feeling. And it just popped up in my head. So I'm like, maybe somebody just giving me some content, heard my basketball video and, decided to swoop in. I don't know, but I really do like having conversations like these, because it can get me back in the swing of things for content in this channel on basketball stuff. And what you really want to do is just kind of snap out of your head when you've been dealing with what I've been dealing with, and get back to what it is you really love to do. So that's what I think this conversation was about, man. That's why I appreciate it. Came out of thin air, I guess you could say, or wherever it came from. But at the end of the day, I am 50-50. Trading Cade Cunningham feels like a good decision and a bad one at the exact same time. And you just got to trust your gut, man. You got to trust your gut. It looks to me that the Pistons are going forward with him. And, I don't think that's the worst bet in the world. I really don't, because of the upside of the player, what I've already seen from him when he did play. The fact that this is a good, he is having a good offseason. He's not injured right now at all. And you should be excited about him going into this season, but also apprehensive just the same if he goes down with another knee. So that's what I got to say. My name is BDF44. I thank you all for watching. I'm out.